Well, good morning, and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and Environment webinar. This one's entitled Lessons from the Alaska Garden, Consequences and Alternatives to Pesticide Use for Our Soils, Plants, and Ourselves. So my name's Nick Reardon. I'll be hosting today's webinar on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics. And we're joined today by Jeff Lowenfels, who is a journalist and author of 3 best-selling books on organic gardening. He's teaming with microbes, teaming with nutrients, and teaming with fungi, a trilogy on soil science or soil ecology and soil science, with the aim of helping growers improve plant health without the use of harmful chemicals. Lowenfels, he's also the longtime contributor to the Anchorage Daily News, with an ongoing garden column spanning more than 40 years, amongst other things that I'm sure we'll hear from Jeff today. So yeah, welcome, Jeff, and thanks so much for joining us.
What a pleasure to be here. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll just say right out at the beginning, nobody who's listening to this should ever use pesticides. All right. Just had to say it.
Good, in case people have to leave early.
Right,
exactly. Covered. But I'll say a little bit more about this. So for those not familiar, this Che Alaska call, it's a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and Environment. That's the CAG. And our aim is to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. So you can get more information on that, though, from our website at akaction.org or healthandenvironment.org. And so after a decade of teleconferences, this is the first Che Alaska call that's hosted on Zoom. So we've really leapt forward here. And so thanks to our listeners who have navigated the transition with us. And we'll keep refining things if we find any little kinks along the way, but all's good thus far. And so as usual, this will be an hour long, and we'll reserve some time near the end to invite questions from listeners. A little different than usual, we'll probably have folks type their questions into the chat box, and then we can read them out, but we'll see how we go there. We might be able to just switch people on to share too with their video.
What's the chat box?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah. Chat right there. Okay.
Totally.
It's got that little thing there. Okay. Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a good point.
I'm an old guy, you know. Yeah. This is not easy for me to use. Okay. I see it. Okay. Yeah. We got it.
No, you're spot on though. Yeah. So the chat box is right there at the bottom tab of tools, and so that's
Good.
We can cross that bridge again too in about 40 minutes.
Sure.
But yeah, so welcome again, Jeff. We're so pleased to have the chance to learn from your wealth of experience and hear some of your perspectives on pesticides and these environmental issues. So yeah, maybe to kick it off, we were chatting earlier about how you worked with my dad as a lawyer. So I'm kind of curious here right off the bat, how you made that transition, what got you started on gardening, and how it became such a focus of your work.
Sure. Well, I've always been a gardener. My father and grandfather were big-time gardeners, and if you wanted to spend time with either one of them, you spent it in the garden with them, or in the wintertime in a greenhouse with them. And so I just had no choice, basically. But fortunately, it turned out to be a fun thing to do. I came up to Alaska at about the second week up here. I discovered that the Anchorage Daily News was published by a joint agreement with the Anchorage Times, 2 newspapers, 1 publisher, and one of them was a Chamber of Commerce Go paper, and one of them was a Pulitzer Prize paper. And the Pulitzer Prize paper was not doing well. It was going out of business. And make a long story very short, we set up a committee. I sold a lot of subscriptions on the street one day, and the publisher of the paper said, "What else can you do for me?" And I said, "Hey, I can write a garden column." And so I did. And I've been writing a garden column now for 44 years, never missed a single week in all of that time. And it's really been quite something. Now, they started out as letters home to my father. Basically, this is what I'm doing this week. And discovered that there was a real nerve here in Alaska for people who wanted to garden and didn't know how to do it. And so lots of questions started coming in, and the column has become a regular in the Anchorage Daily News. And it's been a lot of fun to write, little kind of frustrating. And but I was always very chemical when I started.
Yeah.
And the reason I was chemical has to do with the fact that my family is indirectly responsible for starting Miracle Grow chemical fertilizer. which is now owned by the Scott's Miracle-Gro company. The gentleman who founded the company worked for my father and grandfather. He was an advertising executive, and he hated the job because my father sold butter and margarine. My picture's on the margarine package as a result of the guy from Miracle-Gro, which is why I'm allowed to badmouth the product that they make. But not that I wouldn't have done it anyway. Long story short, again, he hated his job working for my parents because my father and grandfather, because the butter business is very dull. And he went out and he discovered this greenhouse with a new formula that made Miracle-Gro. And he went into business. He made a lot of money the first week partnering with the guy who had this formula. And then he came into my father and grandfather and he quit. He said, I love you guys. I hate this job. I quit. Yeah. Long story again, even shorter. Now he is dead, but his son owns the gigantic company called Scott's Miracle-Gro. And you see him every spring yelling at us to tell us to put fertilizers and pesticides and all. They are the licensor of glyphosate called Roundup now, a terrible thing I never use. And it was one of those things that because of the relationship in the family, I just always use Miracle-Gro.
Yeah.
And then one day somebody sent me a picture of a nematode being strangled by a fungus that was protecting a root. It's in the book. I couldn't figure out what it was, and once I finally did, it changed my life. Because I suddenly realized that there's all these living organisms in the soil. And fungus and bacteria aren't bad. They're what keep life going in the soil. And so it completely changed my philosophy, because using these chemicals either kills these microbes in the soil that feed our plants, or they change the diversity of the populations and shift things around so that we get other consequences. And it became very clear to me that we were making big time mistakes here in Alaska in particular because of our pristine nature, and that I was responsible for a lot of these usages. And so I've really tried to make amends ever since. I don't know if that answered your question, but in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you mentioned, so in addition to seeing that photo of a micro photo of a nematode being strangled by a root, or sort of getting this glimpse.
No, strangled by a fungus. Strangled by a fungus that was protecting the root. Wow, God, that was amazing.
Were there other events or ideas over that 44 years or longer experience in gardening that also prompted you to make this switch?
Yeah, I think a number of them, and the switch was incremental, that's for sure. Yeah. Having children makes a big difference. All of a sudden you start to pay attention to the articles that indicate, gee, it might be slightly safe for you, but your kid's half your size. Don't wear your shoes inside the house after you've sprayed the lawn with the weed killer. This is on the label because you're tracking the stuff in the house, and your children will pick it up as they play on the floor. Yeah. Begins to make you sort of scratch your head. My wife got breast cancer. And of course, when that happens, you begin to think what caused it, et cetera. And I'm quite convinced that I gave my wife breast cancer. I caused it. A number of chemicals that I was suggesting people use. And one I always point to is a chemical called Saigon 2E, which doesn't exist anymore. It was this chemical that the American Rose Society was telling everybody, you paint it around your rose bush, it's systemic, it goes in, and any aphids that hit the rose die. Does it work on birch trees? Yeah, it does. And the next thing I know, I'm pouring it into a styrofoam cup, getting my paintbrush, and the styrofoam cup melts in my hand. Whoa, so all of these chemicals have been removed from the market, but voluntarily by people who were producing them, and it makes you sort of sit back and think, wow, what's going on? And then of course there was this event, that picture of the nematode strangling, it was just an epiphany. It just woke me up like nothing, very few things have. And then I discovered what is called the soil food web system. Plants take the sunlight, they use the energy, they produce sugars, they drip them out of the roots, they attract bacteria and fungus. The bacteria and fungus, they eat all the carbons that are coming out of the roots, and they attract all this life that comes into the root system, into the soil, into the root system, eat the bacteria and fungus, excrete the excess, and all of that excess feeds the plant. Wow, what a beautiful system. And here I was, at the time probably still America's longest running garden columnist, and I had no idea this system existed. And then I discovered there were these things called mycorrhizal fungi. These are special fungus. And every single plant you know of, except for the ones your kids don't like to eat, the cabbage family, the cole family, basically every plant you know, 90 to 96% of the plants on the planet Earth associate and form a symbiotic relationship with a particular kind of fungus that goes out in return for these exudates and brings back to the plant all manner of major nutrients and water. Wow. That feed the plant. Unbelievable. So here in Alaska, we walk around and we see these Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Those are the fruiting bodies of the fungus that are in the soil feeding those birch trees. And if you don't have those Amanita muscaria, your birch trees are not healthy and well. No one told me any of this stuff. When I heard about bacteria and fungus as an early garden writer, they were bad. They were things you had to get rid of. Dandelions, oh my God, I hate them. And I was killing them left and right with every chemical I could get. What a mistake. I still hate them, but we lost this war. So, and it shouldn't be a war. That's the point. So over the years, I think I've tried to develop a golden rule of gardening, which I hope everybody follows. And it's sort of, we share information in plants. We plant one row at least in our garden to feed the hungry because we have that capability. And we never, ever use pesticides or chemical fertilizers, ever. That's just the golden rule. And if you're not following that rule, you're not respecting your neighbors, and you're not demonstrating the right kind of love you should be having for your family, nonetheless the environment. So there's my big lecture, and I can't help it. I just spill into it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that makes sense, Jeff. I think you're with having that many decades behind you of writing and responding, receiving and responding to questions from folks. I'm curious too how what sort of like common practices you found that folks, what methods that they use that are especially detrimental and alternatives to those too.
Sure. Well, let's start with the big problem we're having here in Alaska with our spruce bark beetle. Problem that they're having, they have beetle problems all over the place, or they're having, emerald ash borer problems. And people spray. I'm very, very, very upset about that, and I'm against it. I don't think it should be done. With regard to our spruce trees, yes, you may save the tree for a couple of years. That tree will succumb at some point in time to the spruce bark beetle, whether it's this wave or the next wave. But those sprays are not benign. They kill bees, flying insects, birds, fish, all manner of things, and God knows what they really do to us, because our government relies on studies that are submitted by the companies that want to have products approved. And in this country, unless you can prove that study and that approval is wrong, we don't do anything about it. We don't have what's known as the precautionary principle. And so we just willy-nilly let anybody who goes out and gets a license, and I'm sorry, these are good people, I understand, they want to make a living, spray trees. I don't want that to happen because I don't want to have all the damage that occurs. And I recognize that these sprays can drift miles and miles. It's fine. They notify the next door neighbor that the trees are going to be sprayed tomorrow, but they haven't told me I'm 5 miles away. This is really unacceptable in Alaska, in particular, because we are a pristine place. The other thing people do is they use glyphosate, Roundup. Our government uses Roundup. Our assembly allows Roundup to be used in this city. It's criminal, absolutely criminal. We have a problem with mountain ashes taking over riparian waterways. It's a terrible invasive. We use Roundup because people are convinced it's the only thing that will get rid of this stuff once and for all. And clearly we don't want these mountain ashes taking over our riparian areas. We let them use Roundup for that. And then we find out that they're also using Roundup because they think it's the only thing that works along our railroad tracks up and down the state of Alaska. And then we find out that they're using Roundup because, oh, it's the only thing that works. Wait a second. If you're not allowed to use it, you'll find something else that will work. It's too easy. And our assembly and our legislature completely ignores the fact that we live in a pristine environment here. We're the only place in the country that basically still has its indigenous trees, that in the lower 48 states, 80% of the trees don't belong there. Well, that has impacts on the insect life. We're the only place in the country where you can get water out of a stream that doesn't have Roundup in it. Wow. So what are we doing? Why do we allow these things to happen? I could go on and on and on, and it's not just the chemicals. I don't want to get the emails, but it's we let cats roam, blah blah blah, all these things we do, and we let our government do it because we are too damn lazy to help ourselves and to save ourselves, because that's what we're talking about ultimately. Whew.
Are there have you thought much, or do you have ideas for particular regulations that could be put in place? You may be familiar, like ACAT here, Alaska Community Action on Toxics. We've worked with the local Alaska Youth for Environmental Action and the Alaska Center and many other
organizations, sure,
to try to get the assembly and with success to create strengthen pesticide regulations with the pesticide-free Anchorage ordinance and pesticide-free schools ordinance. Like you said, the schools being a great place to start because that's where children are. As developing, endocrine disrupting chemicals are, all the more harmful when you're dealing with that.
Sure. And it's such a great thing that all these organizations have done, and our assembly is sometimes receptive, but not often. Glyphosate should not be sold anywhere. Why are people using glyphosate? We should take the precautionary standard on this one. The fact that Europe and other places have banned it, we should open our eyes. We know that the standards that are used by our government, they're bad, they're wrong, they're old-fashioned, they use microscopes instead of electron microscopes. They look at a whole animal instead of cellular impacts. I mean, think about it. You don't look at the cellular impacts to see what's happening in individual cells. Well, we know that's, if it was a disease, that's what you'd be looking at. It's just crazy what we do. Oh, the animal lived for 90 days. It's okay. 90 days? I mean, how old am I? I'm 70 years old. If I'd been using, we'd be gone every single year. That's 70 years worth of stuff, not 90 days. So we've got to get our assembly, I think, to adopt the precautionary standard with regard to these chemicals. We should not be allowed to spray any of these chemicals at all unless A, you are licensed and trained, and B, only under some very specific circumstances. Dandelions, it's a war we have lost. America has lost the war. Alaska's lost the war. Anchorage has lost the war. Why do we continue to spray like crazy and ruin our water systems? This is a state where we've got wells all over the place. You know, it's not like New York City where they're getting all their stuff out of a reservoir. Individual wells are impacted by individual activities in a way that doesn't happen to a reservoir. So I think there've been a lot of advances forward. The fact that we've got the schools, okay, well, you could live right next door to that school and spray like crazy. It all drifts into this, right into the West High swimming pool. I mean, let's face it. Let's be sensible. Now, you know, it's tough sometimes to get the assembly to act because, God forbid, you should upset a homeowner, you know, who wants to have a pristine green lawn. To me, you should have police who drive around town. This is, you know, how I'd refund the police, who drive around town, and if they see a lawn without dandelions, that person gets a fine for using chemicals and destroying our health. They should have to pay for that. Now, these are crazy, radical ideas that we'll, you know, our assembly, I don't know, but we've got to keep pushing them. And it's the precautionary principle that we really should be pushing. Canada has it. That's why you don't, in Canada, you can't use Weed Be Gone on a lawn, a residential lawn, period, anywhere. Not because it's been proven to be cancer causing, but because their Supreme Court adopted what's known as the precautionary principle. There's enough smoke to indicate that there may be some real fire. There are enough reports from doctors that indicate that there's a real problem that we're going to stop this until we know what the real answer is. But I'm preaching to the converted, probably.
Well, it's yeah, you're in a unique position, Jeff, where with your weekly column and yeah, as such a long-standing reputation and kind of contribution in the gardening world here in Anchorage, that yeah, a lot of people respect you and listen to you, and so it's local. You know, our callers in, I think many of them as well might. Yeah, there's stuff to learn here for sure. It's appreciated. I'm curious.
Well, you know, but there are also, yeah. I was just going to say there are an awful lot of people who are furious that I'm taking this stance. I mean, there are a lot of people who are chemical heads. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and I have been struggling with this since the, you know, late '90s, and I should tell you the EPA sent me through law school. You know, so I'm not all that, you know, even though I did oil and gas work and things like that. But it took me a long time to finally come to I think close to the right kind of phrase. If you spray your lawn, you don't love your kids. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. If you spray your lawn, you don't respect your neighbors. If you spray your trees, you're not respecting the environment. You're not respecting your kids, your wife, your family, your husband. It's just that simple. And it took me a long time to, you know, instead of saying you're a bad person, no, you can be a fine person. You just don't love your kids. And I think that's an easy way to look at it. And I would say to the assembly, fine, you know, you want people to spray? You know, you don't love kids.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's, you know, those sorts of frameworks, it can be more compelling to talk about it in that context of the humans that we know and love. And sure, these people are community. The microbes don't always get the most attention in that they're invisible to the naked eye. So.
But that's our fault. That's our fault too. I mean, think about it. We're a society that raises kids. They learn to walk. They learn their colors, and then they learn what? Dinosaurs. Every kid in this country knows dinosaurs. What the heck are we teaching them about dinosaurs when we could be teaching them about something that's really alive and useful, just as fascinating, but so important? And I've always maintained, and in fact, I had a talk I gave in Houston, and I think there were a couple of muckety-muck teachers there from the school board, and we need to substitute. Let's teach kids about bacteria and fungus and nematodes and protozoa. Why do we wait until 10th grade? You know, teach them about dinosaurs in 10th grade, but learn the microbes early on. You're right. It's one of these things, and it would be instant change when all of a sudden people would understand it, right on down to the viri, I might add, but you know, the virus and stuff. But dinosaurs is not the way to start. Microbes is the way to start. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but there you go.
I led you down that road.
All right.
We were talking a little bit about, you mentioned dandelions and yards and stuff like that, and you know, the classic like Weed Be Gone or Weed and Feed products, those like mixtures of fertilizer and broad herbicides. I've been coming across lately research around, or even complaints and issues that come up where the herbicides, you know, grass clippings are a common thing to use in compost piles, be it in somebody's backyard or it's something that gets, in the case of Anchorage, you know, curbside pickup of
Right.
yard waste carried off to a commercial composting facility, it's processed and then returned. But that some of these chemicals are persistent enough. I'm curious if you've engaged with that research or heard about these examples or have any thoughts in terms of.
Yeah, it's a big problem. First of all, you got to make sure that the municipal compost or whatever compost you're getting back was made properly, so that it kills even E. coli and things like that. So that's a big problem. But you know, there was a chemical I can never pronounce it. Chlorpropid. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Chlorpropid. Anyway, I can't even say it. It was in Washington. Yeah. Washington, I'm terrible. Washington State, it was in the compost. It was used. And the compost itself was killing evergreens all over the place. It's against the law to use the stuff, you know, and anything that's going to be composted. It's a real problem because we don't know enough of the science as individuals. You know, I think it's important that people compost, but you got to know what's in your compost. You got to know whether or not there's been manure added to your compost. You got to know whether that manure came from an animal that was receiving antibiotics. You just have to be careful. And the easiest way to be careful is to simply ban these products. There's no need for them. Absolutely no need for them. You know, we go back to that dandelion. The sprays don't work. The sprays don't work. You know, I have to slap people and say it 3 or 4 times. And they say, of course it works. Look at my lawn. It's completely green. I sprayed it this spring. It's beautiful. I go, yeah. And you're going to spray it again next spring because the sprays don't work. The dandelions are back. You got to spray again. Oh, people go, oh, wait a minute. I never thought of that. They don't work. And so you know, people just have to pay attention. What's it going to take? This COVID virus thing is a great example. You know, this morning I heard that one of these, I got to be careful how I say it. This morning I heard that one of the senators that refused to wear a mask and was poo-pooing the whole virus thing caught the virus. He's tested positive. This is a guy that said back in June, if he caught it, he'd wear a mask for the rest of his life, basically. You know, okay, now he understands. We don't need that here in Anchorage. You want to wait until your kid develops some kind of cancer or until your wife develops breast cancer before you decide, oh, maybe these chemicals aren't any good. It's time, again, to adopt this precautionary standard. We know there's something wrong. We know something's going on. You know, why did the chickadees all have that curved beak here? What's going on? It's got to be these chemicals, no question in my mind. And then you add in climate change and all these other problems. Got to pay attention.
Yeah, when you're dealing with environmental issues, there's so many factors at play. You know, changes in habitat. The variety of chemicals that were used, the chemicals that are then used to replace them and are just coming on into practice.
You know, here's an interesting example. You know, a long time ago, we had a garden columnist, well-meaning, who pushed a product that was basically 8-32-16, 32 being the thing I want to talk about. That's the middle number that number represents the phosphorus. And it's a very high number in my books. Well, let's put it this way. That number doesn't exist anymore in the trilogy on lawn fertilizers because we're coming to the point where we're not going to have any of it anymore. So we're reaching peak phosphate. 832.16 is such a high number that lawns, and this was supposed to be applied every 3 weeks, that lawns that had that applied to it have so much phosphorus in them right now. They will have phosphorus for the next 100 years, probably excess and phosphorus poisoning, causing all manner of different kinds of problems for those individual properties and gardens and trees here in Anchorage that followed that process. And it's biting us today, some 30, 40 years later. It's still persistent. Can you imagine? When you talk about, that's a basic nutrient for plants. When we start talking about things that are toxic individually, how persistent. This is Alaska. We don't need it. You don't need it in the lower 48 states or any place else either. But here in particular, we have a special responsibility. This is a different kind of place than any place else that's left in the country.
The nature of this place that we live in, you mentioned climate change. It's definitely on my mind that, you know, there's issues that we're currently contending with, like spruce bark beetles, people spraying insecticides or you know, root drenching or drilling or whatever, but treating a spruce tree with a neonicotinoid. I'm curious if you have inklings or ideas of, so there's ongoing issues that we can approach the assembly about, but things that might become increasingly problematic in the future, or thought in terms of climate change or in terms of environmental change with invasive species, so-called invasive species, or other pests or things like that may emerge, or that you may have started to hear from people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, we're having lots of problems. Of course, we've got the emerald ash borer that came in from the lower 48 states. You drive around the highways today, literally today, you'll see white clover everywhere. The number of invasives that are coming into the state increase all the time. We've got to pay attention to it. We've got to have better education about these things, because again, we have a very special responsibility. But climate change is happening here for sure, and that means, you know, that people do what I always used to do, and I've really, God, I just could kick myself for some of the terrible things that I've caused. We used to always look to ways to push the envelope a little bit further in terms of what we could grow here. Oh boy, can I grow that here? I'd love that. Well, what you can grow in the lower 48 states, you bring it up here and it becomes an invasive. So for example, for years, I've been pushing a plant called Liguilleria. Beautiful plant. God, I drive around Anchorage, I see it in all manner of gardens. It's got a big yellow spire, lots of little flowers on it, goes up and spectacular. But it occasionally escapes. I'm telling people to plant an invasive. That is not what we should be doing. So I think we've got to have a much more careful plant list of what's available. You know, this sounds like, real government in your face kind of stuff. But again, we have a special responsibility. There are lots of plants that people should not plant. Let's keep them in the botanical garden if we want to take a look at them. Even some of the fruit trees and things that we're putting in, we've got to be very, very careful about what we do. Orange and red hawkweed up in Talkeetna, what used to be just a little square foot plot is now, getting to be almost half a mile. This is terrible. We've got these yellow things that aren't dandelions. Where'd they come from? Sow thistle. Whoa, this is not good stuff, and we need to stop it. And I know that the assembly, for example, they don't want to get involved in this stuff. They don't want to tell people. We still have this reputation as Alaskans of being these independent people who could care less about our neighbors. We're going to do what we want to do. And if we want to run that chainsaw at 12 o'clock at night, we're going to run that chainsaw at 12. No, that's not who we are. That's the perception I think that people think. And I say that based upon the fact that I've been writing this garden column a long time. I walk around supermarkets, I see all manner of people from all walks of class of life who come up and say, hey, can I ask you a question? People are in this state Alaskans, not libertarians first. They're Alaskans first. And Alaskans understand that there is this special responsibility to keep this place Alaska. Again, I wander off, but we've got all these, we've got a terrible number of plants that are coming in here. And we've got a real responsibility to stop planting them, to remove some of them. I mean, the idea of cutting down a big tree because it's an invasive, like, you know, these mountain ashes, it upsets people. Well, we got to do it. Sorry, you know, just has to be done. So, yeah. And when we replant these trees, we got to be careful about what we do replant. Very careful.
Yeah, I think that's where, yeah, especially, having guidance, having informed guidance, because it's a lot to wrap one's mind around sometimes.
It is, and it's not something that the assembly would say, well, yeah, you know, maybe we ought to spend a little bit of money and think this through. Well, they should, because this is the same assembly, you know, that elected the municipality, and I was part of it back in the day. You know, they had this wonderful little booklet of all the plants that you could plant everywhere along and here's what a street planting ought to look like. You know, we wonder why moose wander into the middle of the street to go get the tree that's in the middle of this. What were we thinking? Why were, you know, so, you know, we used to do it to make the place prettier. Let's do it to make the place environmentally safer. Let's spend some money. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
You know.
A distinction there that jumps out, Jeff, is so it's one thing, like I have little booklets, invasive plants of Alaska.
Sure.
And that helps me identify, okay, so these are considered invasive. These are, someone has gone out and done research and identified that this has the potential to spread and has spread in certain parts of the state. But it's that then the next step of that of methods, how to address that. You talk about like dandelions, you know, we maybe have lost that. They're ever present. So yeah. You're right. You have to address these things in a new kind of way. And sometimes the answer is, we don't know. We can't do it. It doesn't work. Now, from a dandelion perspective, someday somebody will develop, and they came real close in Canada, a fungus that will infect the leaves and kill it. They had a fungus that did it. Unfortunately, it also killed lettuce. So that's not a commercial viable product, but that'll happen. But what I'm hoping happens before that is people understand, you know, they're part of the nature now. We've got to live with them. This is not something that we're going to be able to eradicate, you know, using a chemical. We may be able to figure out how to change the pH, et cetera, but then we have to figure out what's the impact of doing those things. These dandelions now have been here for 100, 150 years. Do our bee populations require them? You know, do our pollinators need them? We need to study these things. And again, it's not the kind of thing that somebody sitting on the assembly who's got somebody in Eagle River worried about whether or not their store can open because their sign's too small or you know, sign ordinances take preferences over studies and environmental stuff. It's a shame. And I blame it again on the dinosaur. Let's start with the microbes. You know, all of a sudden people would, you know, the kids would understand, no, you can't do that, mommy, daddy, you can't do that. That kills it. The impression I'm getting in part at the local level, we're talking a bit about the assembly, our local assembly and municipality. I imagine at some level it comes down to how many complaints or how many contacts and how much communication is occurring on these issues. And so perhaps, the signs get more chatter. This is, something for people to deal with.
Right. And of course, I think, you know, frankly, a lot of the good activity, or as you know, the late John Lewis said, the good trouble comes from young people who understand the social media, needs to be used much more effectively in order to be able to get the assembly to understand that this is a town not made up of rednecks. I'm sorry, that may be not a proper term to say, but is made up of a lot of people who are real serious thinkers who are living here specifically because it is such a wonderful environment. And we want to keep it that way. We have to keep it that way. God forbid, that you have to look your kid in the eye and say, gee, I'm sorry, you can't fish anymore in Alaska because there's too much glyphosate in the water. We can't eat the fish anymore. We don't want that to happen.
Jeff, there's a couple of questions that have popped in that I'll just read through and
sure.
Adam. But here's one from Hannah Donart from J National. They're looking for recommendations for gardening fruits and vegetables organically in raised beds because they have very rocky clay soil. And we know that the neighbors have sprayed pesticides on their property. So do you have any recommendations for protecting your soil? I think that's a good question.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And my recommendation is compost and mulches. Compost and mulches, very, very important. They're full of all of the microbes that contain nutrients, and they're full of all the microbes that eat these microbes and spread those nutrients out. But they buffer the soil. They take in toxics. They do all manner of things that make your garden better. If you've got clay soil, there's only one thing that will turn that clay soil into better soil, and that's adding organic material. You don't have to mix it in. It'll work its way in. The life brings it down into the clay, but that's the only thing that works, organics. And where do you get organics? Compost and mulches.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is it, in terms of actually like protecting from like pesticide use in your neighbor's lot, where does that, is there anything that you can do besides, yeah,
it's very hard to do. Good talk with a neighbor. You just can't, and that's the problem. Why are they allowed to do that? It's again, I compare it to the face mask kind of thing. Why is somebody allowed to do, what's not right for the good of the general company? And we've got to get that concept across to our elected leaders. I don't understand why it's the other way around. It's capitalism, I guess.
Yeah, maybe make your neighbors bake them a pie would be maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think, you suggest to your neighbors, I've got a really stinky thing I'm going to start blowing into your yard. You don't mind, do you? Of course they do. It's very hard to do. Very hard to do. But you got to keep trying.
Yeah. There's another question here specific to actually, what is it? I have Chris here writes from Juneau that they've been advised to apply nematodes to rhododendrons. Oh, this is getting interesting. Since they have an insect that is eating the leaves and at the juvenile stage, must be controlled in the soil. So Jeff, what do you think about applying nematodes?
I'm all for it. Yeah, nematodes are a wonderful part of the soil food web. There are lots of nematodes. There are about 6 of them that are bad, particularly cannabis growers. They get these nematode problems. Their whole plant turns yellow. But nematodes are terrific. And in fact, IPM in general, you go out and get that eats the pest bug. And that's part of the soil food web rules that people will pick up in my books, particularly the first one. You figure out what the problem is, what eats that problem, and that's what you use to control it. And nematodes are terrific. You can get them through the mail. You mix them in a little bit of water. I shouldn't say this, I'm going to jinx it. I'm actually working up a proposal for a 4th teaming book, and it's on teaming with nematodes. So nematodes are terrific.
Oh, wow. Focused. Yeah, that's interesting. There's one more here, current question that we have already. That is it true that most garden plants are not useful to pollinators and that they create a kind of desert for pollinators? which is why we should plant native plants. I think, yeah, that's an interesting question that I've wrestled with myself.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. This is Doug Ptolemy, wonderful book, Bringing Nature Home, I think is the name of it. If you plant a non-native tree, you're losing out, and same thing in the garden, because all those things in the garden are non-native. You're losing out on something that supports insect life, wildlife, birds, etc., and that happens in the garden. So it's very important around your garden, and certainly all over your property, to have natural stands of the natural flora and fauna. So you attract the right kinds of insects to keep everything in balance, because that's what they do. And things are going out of balance right now. I don't know about you, but we don't have mosquitoes here where I live. Wait a minute. This Alaska, when I tell people that, they call me a liar. But the mosquito population in this state, at least here in Anchorage, has fallen off the cliff. Now, we love that, but it may not necessarily be a good thing. So absolutely, you are planting things that don't belong. You need to do a number of things in your garden to make sure that you emulate nature. One of them is making sure that the natural pollinators are in the area. Another one is to make sure that your soils aren't bare. There are no bare soils in nature. What falls from a plant's supposed to stay there. We break that rule by harvesting stuff off the plant, by cleaning the garden out in the fall. No, put mulch down, no bare soils, bring in those insects with natural pollinators.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see here. I was curious myself here, wondering if you could share a little bit more about this conversation around natives versus introduced plants, especially in places where native plants are struggling, like the bark beetle issue. Yeah, anyway, the line gets blurred in my own head between those two.
Right. Yeah, it's a big debate all over the country. A wonderful book just came out by an Alaskan. His name is Zach St. Clair. The name of the book is The Journey of Trees. Literally just came out a couple of weeks ago. It was on NPR, so you can go back and look it up if you're interested. The Journey of Trees. I highly recommend it. And basically what it's about is the fact that climate change is happening. Trees migrate. They're very slow about it, but they migrate. And in some instances, not only do they migrate in one direction, they go back in the other direction. And in some instances, they follow the same pathway, which is amazing. But climate change is now occurring so quickly that the migration isn't possible. And so there's a debate occurring about whether we should move some of these trees ourselves. So you move a tree from Florida to what used to be its natural habitat in the Appalachians. Well, it's a fascinating, a really terrific book, so well written. Again, I gotta repeat it. The Journey of Trees, Zach St. Clair. And it really at the heart of it is this debate. So what do we do with these spruce bark beetles? Do we bring in metasequoia, which might grow here now, which used to grow here? Do we bring them in? Is it an invasive, or is it returning an old plant? Is that different than bringing in a Liguleria, which never grew here? This is stuff we have to think about, and we don't have much time. Now, the recommendation on spruce trees, incidentally, right now is, yeah, probably should just replant spruce trees, but maybe get the gene pool from further south and move it north. That might make a difference. So these are things, but do we have enough time to experiment and think about them? I don't know. What we do know is that if you bring in an oak tree to Alaska, it may not belong here. It may be beautiful, but it may spread all over the place and cause all manner of harm. So we got to be very, very careful. And the Botanical Garden's looking at a lot of this stuff. So
yeah, they'd be good people to chat with too.
Yes.
Another question here on the policy advocacy topic here. Do you know, are there any states that have regulations or guidelines, or other municipalities for that matter, on best practices for supporting organic farming or organic gardening, that you'd recommend, that advocates or people interested in this, their state and local government?
That's, that's a great question. I haven't done the research. Every now and then, somebody writes me and tells me, and I think I'm going to do that. I will do that research because I know there are. There are some very progressive towns. I would imagine we might find one or two of them in the Oregon area, and we should be one of those towns. And certainly in Canada. Yeah. Let me back up a second. There are a number of best practices used in Canada, and if you go to the Canadian Department of Agriculture, whose name I can't remember what it is, but you can find it easy enough. You will find best practices for all manner of things there, because they have had to ban the use of chemicals for cosmetic purposes in yards. What a terrific thing. It was interesting. I was at a conference, just very quickly. I was at a garden writers conference where in the morning we had a breakfast that was paid for by Scott's Miracle-Gro, and they were telling us all about their chemicals that they were making, and we were all there because it was a free breakfast. And the next speaker was the Supreme Court Justice from Canada who wrote the opinion that said, "No, we're not using these chemicals anymore," and cautious about what we're doing. It was quite the juxtaposition, and I urge people to take a look at what they're doing in Canada. We should be doing that here. A great example, all of Canada.
Yeah, that seems like a great next step. It's always wonderful when there's models, and people have been wrestling with these issues before.
Yeah. Hey, I know we're getting towards the end of the hour. I just want to mention one other thing that we all should be doing, and that is, those of us that are gardeners, we all should be growing one row, one container, one pot, whatever you have to feed the hungry. This is such an important thing, particularly now where we're having unbelievable hunger impacts as a result of the virus. It was one thing to say 35 million people go to bed hungry every night, not knowing where their next meal comes from. Now we've got a situation where over 35 million people are going to bed. They were hungry the night before as well. Planting a row for the hungry. If you're capable of growing something, you're capable of taking that to a neighbor that might need it, to a food bank that might need it, a church, a snug, or just leave it in front of a supermarket or someplace where it will be used, because it will be used. So that plant a row for hungry had to get slipped in there.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I couldn't agree. That's certainly the mandate of our our Yardicopia program here at ACAT, helping create community garden spaces and working in collaboration with food pantries is a great way to happen.
Right. I mean, and goodness gracious knows Beans Cafe. Right.
Yeah, it's a fabulous example. If there's anyone else who wants to jump in with questions, feel free to type it into the chat box. You can access that. There's a little toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Or if you are calling, or if you're calling into this by telephone, you could unmute and chime in. There's another. Let's see. There's another question here. We've touched on it a little bit with the residual pesticides in compost, but in your experience or knowledge, do you know, can you decompose toxic contaminants like pesticides in a compost pile, in a hot compost pile, as part of that process?
Yeah, some you can, some you can't. And what you need to do is Google and look it up. If you know the chemical, and that's, of course, that's the problem. I mean, you don't necessarily know. I always advise my readers in the fall to go around, drive around, find a neighbor that's raked up all those leaves and put them into a beautiful black bag for you to pick up and put in the back of your, and then collect as many as you can for composting and for mulching around your plants. I always tell people, make sure that they don't have a dog, because you don't want to pick up the dog poop as well. But You don't know what they've been spraying. So now I tell people, make sure that the lawn has weeds in it, much more likely of getting something that doesn't have a bad chemical in it. But you got to be very careful. Even if you're making your own compost, you got to be very, very careful. What compost does do is it'll take some of the stuff that kills microbes and cleate it. So for example, our water contains chlorine, which evaporates, but it also contains something called chloramines. Chloramines, they get bad bacteria and things like that. They get complexed up by organics, which are in the compost. The compost ties that stuff and holds it up, and so that they're not available to the plant. That's one of the good things it does. But you've got to look it up. Find out what's in it. Look it up. And if you're collecting stuff from other people's properties, if you can't ask them, make sure there are at least weeds in the lawn, clover, dandelions, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got that visual cue.
Right, exactly. I mean, we gotta start being smart about it, because we've got every activity in the world telling us, use this stuff, buy this, you're bad if you don't, all that stuff. We gotta fight it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we are coming up near the end of the hour. If anyone else wants to chime in, there's probably time for one more question. Oh, we've got someone's wondering about vermicomposting, or maybe even the role of earthworms in breaking down pesticides or
Sure.
toxic contaminants.
Oh, they're great. Earthworms are terrific. What goes through an earthworm and comes out the other end doesn't come out the same at the other end. So earthworm castings concentrate phosphorus, and all the nutrients get concentrated in much higher numbers, and that's why vermicompost is so popular. They definitely cleate and take care of some of the toxics. If the worms don't live, if the worms won't eat it, then you don't want to use it. Let's start there. All the worms are looking for are a little bit of bacteria and fungus and protozoa. The other stuff, they just pass right through the bodies. They're not natural to Alaska. People are beginning to see them in their lawns. I get questions. They've only been here for about the past 25 years or so. I start getting questions from people. What are these little things? Those are vermicompostings. You want them. It is an invasive. We got to be careful what kind of worms that are brought in. There are now bad worms that are coming in from Asia that eat the duff too quickly. They will have devastating impacts on our forests if we're not careful. So I don't think you want to bring in earthworms, but if you do, you want to make sure they're red wigglers, and you keep them in a bin, and you don't let them run around like crazy. So, but earthworm castings are fabulous compost, the best there is, as far as I'm concerned.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining us, and everyone else who joined us today. I'll send out a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to the recording, and then a list of related resources. Some that we kind of had picked out earlier, some that came up in this call, and feel free to send along in the chat box or by emailing me at nick.r@akaction.org if you have additional resources that you'd like to share. The next call will be the last Wednesday in August, and we're planning a discussion panel around mining in Alaska and the recent release of the final draft environmental impact statement for the proposed Pebble Mine. And finally, I hope you will consider making a donation to Alaska Community Action on Toxics to support these monthly CHE calls, or CHE Alaska calls. And your contribution, it helps provide the support we need to bring you these calls each and every month. So you can give online at our website at www.akaction.org. And so thanks again, Jeff. Thanks to everyone. And if you have any additional questions or comments, please, feel free to contact us at our office, 907-222-7714. And thanks again to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. It was
a lot of fun. And how funny to see you with hair, glasses, a beard. Who would have ever thought, oh my God almighty.
Yeah, it's a little taller than the last time.
Yeah, a little bit. I think so. Well, good. Stay well. And anytime you want to do this, you get any questions, send them in to me. if I can be of any help. And clearly, when you get a cause and you want help with the assembly, let me know. They hate my guts. I don't mean that in a negative way. They do not like to be mentioned or have things mentioned in the column. Last time I did it, Fred Dyson, I think he almost had a heart attack. So it's my pleasure to do those kinds of things. Let me know.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate that offer. I think that's, yeah, we're, in addition to these Che calls at ACAT, yeah, I'm the coordinator for the Yardicopia program. And yeah, working on pesticide advocacy work is certainly part of my responsibility. So yeah,
Sure.
we'll be in touch. I think the
well,
wheels.
Use me as a threat.
I appreciate that offer. If I come to that.
All right, my pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. All right, stay well.
Yeah, you too, Jeb. Take care.
Okay, mask up. Bye now.
Bye. Funny.